This is my new Patreon series, number 54. It's for those accepted to Home Temple, Diaconate, Priesthood, and Episcopate studies. It's how to use our web pages and playlists for your preparation. Now, I reorganized the Home Temple ordination program in 2020. Home Temple has been a state and federal IRS tax-exempt 501c3 church denomination and seminary since February 2002. Its ordinations and seminary degrees are legal for pastoral ministries and counseling, as well as volunteer or professional hospice, jail, hospital, college, and university chaplaincies. Many of our ordinands have done that. So go to hometemple.org and click on the E application. Then you download the RTF application form by clicking on the link that says here. Fill it out, including names and email addresses of 3 character references, not your spouse or your family. This is a very important part of your application. And send it to me as an email attachment. I'll contact your referees and get back to you as soon as all 3 have responded. Now, assuming positive references, I will schedule a Zoom conference with you. For this, you will need a PC with video cam and a microphone or a smartphone. Depending upon whether you have already taken seminary classes or received valid ordination into diaconate or priesthood or need to start studies from the beginning, we will chart out a course of studies for you. You will use 3 internet resources for your studies. The first is the hometemple.org website. The second is the wisdomseminars.org website, where our School of Sacred Studies with separate internet resources is available on the catalog page, and my Louis Kaiser YouTube channel, where you will find the Diaconate, Priesthood, and Episcopate playlists that supplement the other materials. This is an example up in the upper right-hand thing of what the School of Sacred Studies looks like and what you will find there. This is an example of the Home Temple School of Sacred Studies that we have online through the Wisdom Seminars. It has the diaconate and the priesthood materials and so on. All those are important parts. And then this is a shot of my YouTube channel with the various different playlists. When you go there, you want to click Created Playlists, because that will show all the playlists. Now, there's no tuition or fee for ordination or for ordination studies, but you are asked to sponsor my Louis Kaiser YouTube presentations with a monthly Patreon donation of $10, which is $5 per bi-monthly presentation. I release 2 new presentations each month that are sent to my Patreon patrons, posted to my Facebook pages, and offered free to the interested public via Facebook and my YouTube channel, where they are organized into playlists. So in this presentation, you will find an introduction to all 3 resources. Now, the first playlist for study for the diaconate ordination is the Diaconate Liturgical Studies playlist on my YouTube channel. For the Deacon's Mass instructions, go to wisdomseminars.org, click Catalog, then Sacred Studies, then the Diaconate Studies, and you scroll to the bottom for liturgical and other video presentations, and you click on the Introduction to Sacramental Liturgies. This is the link, which you can't click, of course, in this presentation, but if you click on Sacramental Liturgies, this is what you'll get. Now, the Home Temple Deacon's Mass is a practice Eucharist using pre-consecrated hosts. Because you're not ordained yet, you're not a priest, you can't make your own hosts. It is celebrated facing the altar rather than from behind the altar. And the altar is set up on the east with the celebrant's back to the communicants, who are limited to no more than 3, among a congregation to avoid running out of pre-consecrated hosts. So that's a picture of an old altar I used to have as a deacon's altar in a home in Santa Cruz. These are the consecrated, pre-consecrated hosts that I send to people who are studying. Now, the home temple priests celebrate on the east side of a freestanding altar facing the communicants, with no limit to how many may be in attendance, since priests can consecrate their own hosts. So watch the liturgical video presentations. Click on each link. These are WMV videos that can be downloaded to your desktop from your browser and then played. They were made several decades ago, and some of the information is obsolete, but they're still very useful. So you click on them, and then it'll show that you can download them, and you can keep them on your desktop in a folder somewhere. Now, the following presentations must be viewed in the Diaconate Liturgical Studies playlist on the Louis Kaiser YouTube channel. Liturgics 1, the Toda, which is about the original form of the Eucharist. It was celebrated during the Apostolic period. And Liturgics 2, which is the history and evolution of the Eucharist. So liturgical studies is one aspect of the diaconate studies, and this is the material that you look at in order to understand the more academic parts of liturgics. In the diaconate, we also study the early church. That's another category of things that we study. We study the historical dating and provenance, and we go to New Patron series number 14, which explains how we figure out the historical dating and provenance of the New Testament Gospels and writings and so on. The next one is the New Patron series number 8 on Merkaba mysticism and apocalyptic gnosis in early Christianity. This is a two-part presentation. There's a part 1 and there's a part 2. And then a very important one for you to watch, which was called, What was the Resurrection of Yeshua? Why is it that the kind of resurrection that Christianity celebrates today was not what was originally understood as the resurrection or Kima of Yeshua back in the Apostolic period and in letters of Paul and places like that. So what was it? I want you to watch the New Patron series number 24, how Yeshua's prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem morphed into the Christian end of the world eschatology. Eschatology was not really a part of Yeshua's proclamation. It was apocalyptic, it was revelatory. And then there's a New Patron series number 25, the second coming and judgment. The eschatological two Messiah doctrine of Second Temple Judaism replaced Yeshua's teachings in Paleo Christianity. So what were Yeshua's teachings? The New Patron series 45a, part 1, called Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in your midst. We're going to look at numinous experience in early Christianity, the experience of numinous, or of that which is spiritual and invisible. And then we're going to look at New Patron series 45b, part 2 of the very same thing. So these are your early church studies for the diaconate. Now, the diaconate biblical studies playlist is an important part of diaconate education. Your required textbook is written by Professor Bart Ehrman. It's just called The Bible. And you need to buy this book, and you'll need to read this book in order to answer some of the questions in the questions about Jesus and questions about the Bible that you do in the diaconate studies. So from the Diaconate playlist, these are things you will be looking at. How the historical teachings of Yeshua were lost in Gentile Christianity. How the anti-Judaism, that is actually the anti-Semitism of the Christian Gospels, developed in Gentile Christianity. We compare Matthew and Luke's fictional genealogies and virgin birth and infancy narratives. What do they reveal? Part 1 and Part 2. We have a detailed look at the Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount, or the Sermon on the Plain as it is in Luke. They were actually apocalyptic or revelatory davrim, pronouncements about Yeshua, about the Messianic age that was already present and emerging on earth. For the Old Testament and the history of Israel, we have a playlist for the Old Testament and history of Israel. The first one we look at is Jewish prophetic and priestly mysticism, Part 1, and then Part 2 of the same. And then Second Temple Kabbalistic mysticism, Part 1, Part 2 of the same. Now we have a program of exegetical studies for the diaconate, because one of the things you have to do, aside from turning in papers about questions about Jesus and questions about the Bible, is an exegetical paper. Exegetical means interpretive. Now the rubrics for the exegetical assignment are these. You have to identify and evaluate the sources. Mark, Thomas, Q, Luke, Matthew, John. We have to identify key Aramaic words and messianic concepts. We have to identify and evaluate the redactional spin in the source. That is, what was the person who wrote it trying to emphasize. And we're going to try to reconstruct the probable historical parable or teaching originally given by Mar Yeshua that underlies these later presentations in the Christian Gospels. And then you're going to give your interpretation of Yeshua's historical teaching and its meaning to a modern disciple, as opposed to the interpretation in the context it was given in whatever Christian source we have. So you need to study the presentations on my YouTube playlist and then choose 5 sayings and write an exegesis for each. So things that will help you on the exegetical studies playlist. Pre-C 15, Introduction to my new book, The Pre-Christian Teachings of YESHUA, which will help you very much with exegetical work. And it's how to navigate my new book, The Pre-Christian Teachings of YESHUA, all of the extant authentic sayings and teachings of Yeshua that were remembered in the earliest oral Jesus traditions and collections compiled by his Jewish disciples AD 30 to 50, before they were rendered into Greek and misunderstood and Christianized in the later Gospels. Module 4a, Views of the Coming Messiah, or Module 4b, 4 Views of the Messiah, one of those two. Module 5, Identifying and Recovering the Historical Teachings of Mar Yeshua, Part 1. The same, Part 2, about reconstructing the teachings. Module 6a, The Spiritual Practices of Yeshua, Part 1. And there's a Part 2. Module 7a, The Vocabulary of Yeshua, Part 1 and Part 2. And Key Concepts in the Messianic Mysteries of Mar Yeshua, Part 1 and Part 2. And finally, Module 9 on exegesis to help you with your exegetical studies and with your exegesis. Then you have an aspect of studies for the diaconate we call Yeshua studies. And they're very important. They're not really something that is covered in other seminaries or other seminary preparation. And so regardless of what preparation you've had, you will have to probably go through these studies. Um, You'll need to look at a brief introduction to part 1 of my Lost Christian Aramaic Teachings of Yeshua seminar. The next is an introduction to Yeshua Studies, part 1. He taught and practiced in a context of Jewish Messianic and Gnostic mysticism that scholars have only recently been able to understand. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Coptic Gnostic Library, the literature of Second Temple Judaism, and historical relics like the Shroud of Turin have revealed a Jesus very different from that of Christian theology. That's the Yeshua of history that we want to understand and study. Then we have an introduction to Yeshua Studies Part 2, a presentation on the existence of the historical Yeshua as opposed to the fictional Jesus of Christianity. Some people have doubted that a real Jesus ever really existed. Well, that's because the Jesus that's represented in the Christian Gospels was not a real person. And a presentation on the Aramaic Davrim, that is revelatory sayings, and mashlim, or what we later called parables of Yeshua. They were not Greek logia and parables. Now we're going to study the Aramaic Lord's Prayer, Our Abba who art in the heavens. What does that mean? And the book that you can use for that is called Abbaun, the authentic Aramaic meaning of the Lord's Prayer, and so it's available on Kindle. I recommend it. People that claim to be telling you what the authentic Lord's Prayer in Aramaic was are deluded, because all they're doing is taking the Greek translation of the Lord's Prayer, which was already spun a certain way, and translating it from the later Syriac that was sourced from the Greek itself rather than from Yeshua. So that is not the real Aramaic Lord's Prayer that you find by that people put online and say this is the real Aramaic Lord's Prayer. No, it's the Lord's Prayer in Syriac. What we are looking at is the actual authentic Aramaic meaning of the Lord's Prayer. It's quite different. The Aramaic meaning of the Lord's Prayer and Yeshua's vision of the age to come or future of humanity and the earth in the petition, grant us this day our bread of the future, our bread of the morrow. It's not our daily bread. It's bread of Mahar. And now here we examine the Abba and Yeshua's concept of Godhead in the Aramaic Lord's Prayer. And we examine Hashem, the name, so-called, of God that is supposed to be hallowed. What does that mean? And another presentation, the name of God that must be hallowed. And then what we can reconstruct of the life of Yeshua and Yeshua's inner circle teachings on death and life after death and reincarnation and the purification of the soul. Now, once one has completed the diaconate studies and received the diaconate, we don't say you are ordained to the diaconate, we say you are made a deacon. Then you can go ahead and do priesthood studies, where you will be ordained a priest. The playlist we're going to talk about now is the liturgical studies playlist for priesthood that I have on my YouTube channel. So home temple priests celebrate on the east side of a freestanding altar facing the communicants, with no limit for how many can be in attendance, since priests can consecrate their own hosts. So here I am on a particular altar in a particular place when I was ordaining someone or consecrating someone. I'm on the east side. So the east is to my back, and I'm facing the communicants. This is the freestanding altar I have myself that I had specially made with the face of Yeshua on the front of the altar. The Apostolic Toda was a means of invoking the presence and guidance of Yeshua. Now that should continue to be the purpose of the Eucharist or the Mass. So from the Priesthood Liturgical Studies channel, we have part 1, the original form and purpose of the Eucharist, Yeshua's Messianic Seder, and the Apostolic Toda. Later developments, such as the Kyriakon Diepnon, the Agape, and the Pauline Reformed Kyriakon Diepnon are discussed. And we have a summary of Yeshua's Basor, or proclamation, and the teachings on self-regeneration. In part 2, we have a detailed comparison of the traditional Mass to Kaiser's liturgy of the new humanity that has been conformed to reflect the historical Basor, or gospel, and teachings of Yeshua. Modern Masses do not reflect the teachings of Yeshua. They're simply a worship of Yeshua. Number 3, the historical origin of the Christian Mass, which wasn't the legendary Last Supper. It was the Last Supper. It was the Messianic Shabbat Seder of Yeshua, which he used as a teaching venue for his close disciples who walked with him. In the Priesthood Yeshua studies, we have the following that are watched on the Yeshua Studies Priesthood channel. One called the Abba. It's current research into Yeshua's name for God, which includes comments on the Markan legend of Barabbas and Yeshua as a non-violent revolutionary. And again, I recommend Abbaun, the authentic Aramaic meaning of the Lord's Prayer, which you can find on Kindle. We have a presentation on the poor and the meek of Yeshua's Beatitudes. They were not what most people think. This is a deep dive into the most misunderstood of the Beatitudes. We have an examination of Yeshua's opposition to the corruption of the Jerusalem temple establishment, which is shared with many other contemporaries, and how his view for eschatological reform was similar to the Essene view. We have number 4, Yeshua's Mysteries of the Malkuth. It's preserved in the Gospel of Thomas and other early texts. It's about spiritual regeneration, the Kabbalistic soul, and teachings on death and afterlife. We have a presentation about the historical Yeshua who initiated his inner circle disciples into the Ratzim HaMalkuth HaShamayim, which we translate in the New Testament as the mysteries of the kingdom of the heavens, or the kingdom of heaven. It literally means the hidden secrets of divine or angelic sovereignty or sovereignties, which he did in an all-night ritual and gave them initiatic names. Part 1 examines the evidence for initiatic practices of spiritual coming into existence or rebirth. Part 2 examines the inner circle Kabbalistic manda or gnosis about the origin of all things, death, and other teachings of Yeshua. And number 7 talks about Yeshua's concept of God, the Abba, which went far beyond the theological views of modern Christianity and had only a tenuous relationship to the God of the Old Testament. And in part 2, we explore the influence of Hellenism and Buddhism on the Jewish Midrashic and wisdom teachings that informed Yeshua's unique view of Godhead. So continuing with the Yeshua studies for ordination to the priesthood, the 9th presentation explores the patrilineal Aaronite or Levitical priesthood or familial priesthood of Yeshua and John the Baptist and their families, and the implication of his seamless ketonet, the white robe. Yeshua was qualified to serve as a priest at the temple, as was John the Baptist. The 10th one is what Yeshua taught contrasted with the Christian doctrine of atonement for the sins of humanity by Christ on the cross. Now, Paleo-Christians channeled the Lord and cherry-picked proof texts to develop the oral passion narrative that was finally enshrined in the Gospels. But that's not what Yeshua taught. So you have to understand how this atonement theology developed, and it was not based in what Yeshua taught. And by the way, these are not things I've invented. This is what scholars have come up with and most scholars agree upon. I have a presentation on hymns that Yeshua might have sung with his disciples. We have clues from the Christian odes of Solomon and the Sibyllins and other early hymnody. Mark says, and Matthew also says, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. What might have these hymns been? And now we look at the purpose and intentions of Yeshua during his final days in Jerusalem. And they are revealed by analyzing two historical legends, the so-called cursing of the fig tree and the agony in the garden. Yeshua was not intending to be crucified, that he was not a Christer who just wanted to go and have his body atone for the sins of humanity. He was trying to accomplish something much more important than that. Now we have one on the Desposanoi, which is the name for the relatives of Yeshua. And we ask, was Yeshua married? What do we know about the family of Yeshua? We have one on exorcism, Yeshua's view of the interior nature of Satan and demons and how exorcism worked is very different from the way these were interpreted in the Christian Gospels as exterior entities and phenomena, and are still viewed in modern Christianity. The teachings of Yeshua on spiritual generation or regeneration or self-regeneration were different from the rebirth concept transmitted in John's Gospel. They were better transmitted in the fifth Gospel, or the Gospel of Thomas, and the Valentinian Gospels like Philip, than in biblical Christianity. And we can recover the authentic teachings using scholarship. Now, another aspect of priesthood studies, and an important one, is to study the initiatic mysteries of classical antiquity. Christianity was a mystery religion, and let's take a look at what that meant in the ancient world and what those religions had been. This is an important thing to understand if you are training for priesthood in home temple. First, we have one on the evolution of initiation, one on shamanism, the general characteristics of the mysteries from the ancient to modern times, shamanic and priestly communication with the dead, and the mysteries. The link from the Necronomicon video that accompanies this is on another place that you will find in the description. The Osirian mysteries of Egypt, Isis and Osiris. Part 1, the Eleusinian mysteries, the origins in Cretan Minoan public initiatic rituals, probably deriving from earliest Egyptian Isian grain planting and cultivation myth. And part 2, the mysteries of Eleusis and the lesser mysteries of Heracles. The initiatic school and sacred ground served not only the city of Athens, but the entire Hellenistic world. And when it ceased initiating, its history spanned nearly 3 millennia, longer than Christianity, which supplanted it, has survived so far. Western Mystery 6, the Oracle at Delphi, was originally a sacred cave from which sibyls of the earth goddess Gaia rendered their advice and prophecies. It was taken over by priests of the sun god Apollo during the Mycenaean patriarchal conquests, to whom the Sibyls were made subject. Psychically talented maidens from local villages were trained for the work of the priestesses of Apollo. During any given season, when the oracle was open, several different women played the role of the priestess, who sat upon the tripod to channel the messages of Apollo. We'll also examine many other oracles that delivered messages from the divine underworld, including Trophonius and the three-night journey presided over by the Pholarchoi, and all the oracles were supported in the theogonies of the Greek creation myths. This is all information that as a priest you should be aware of. Now, when we have determined that a person is appropriate for advancement to the episcopate, to become a bishop, an independent bishop, there are studies that are required of priests in order to prepare themselves for consecration as a bishop. Now, the requirements for nomination for consecration as a bishop are as followed. You have to complete the BD degree program in the Home Temple School of Sacred Studies, which you do when you finish the priesthood studies and are ready to be ordained. You have to have spent a minimum of 2 years in an active priesthood, not just sitting around. And that's an active ministry and demonstration of spiritual leadership. And you have to keep regular contact with me. If you go away and just do your own thing and never have any contact with me, I don't really know what you're doing, what your progress is. I am legally responsible for what you do as a priest. So if you're not in contact with me, I'm getting a little concerned about that. You have to successfully complete the THG First Order studies, or ordinations, or we might say, the empowerments themselves. You have to do the weather proving, which is the final part of the First Order. And you have to have then earned your dubbing as Knight or Dame of the OMR, the chivalric order of Saint Michael and Saint Raphael. You have to complete all the coursework for the MDiv or the DD degree programs of the Home Temple School of Sacred Studies, including the Episcopal Studies playlist. And you have to have your thesis or dissertation proposal approved, and your nomination approved by the Synod of Home Temple Bishops, which we do informally by telephone, and formally at an annual board meeting. And the bishop-elect may continue work on the master's thesis or doctoral dissertation after consecration, with the promise to complete the dissertation or thesis within a year. So these are Episcopal studies and the Episcopal playlist for the Western mystery tradition. Having understood what you have done about the mysteries of the ancient world, the classical mysteries of previous to Christianity, classical antiquity, you're now going to study the Western mystery tradition, what actually developed here in Christianity and Europe and Western Christianity. First, you're going to do the Western mystery tradition, medieval and modern, part 1, the roots, the elements of Hellenistic, Greek, Jewish, and Gnostic mystery traditions get synthesized into a new Christian initiatic mystery schools that develop in the West. From the ancient Celtic San Graal to the Christian San Graal, the ancient Celtic San Graal, I should say, is the series of initiatic studies that were done in ancient Celtic times before Christianity that involved the study of and practice and the usage of herbs and druidic magic and things like that, and how that was developed into the Christian San Graal, the Holy Grail stories and mysteries. And the third element, the introduction to Hellenistic astrology and cosmology from a modern astronomical perspective, so we can understand what was going on. Western Mysteries, number 4, Angel Magic and Medieval European Goetic Tradition, Part 1. The Magian traditions of exorcising demons and summoning angels is documented in pre-Christian Jewish Kabbalistic, Egyptian demotic, and Greek magical papyri. The scholar Morton Smith theorized in his 1978 book, Jesus the Magician, that YESHUA was a master of this tradition. We have seen in my earlier presentations that Magian angel knowledge attributed to YESHUA was passed on in the 1st to 3rd century Jesus traditions, mainly through Jewish and Christian Gnostic schools. Angel summoning and demon commanding traditions were brought forward into medieval Europe through Jewish Kabbalistic and Christian Kabbalistic, and notice the different spelling for Kabbalistic between Jewish and Christian, their schools. So angel magic and theurgy under the mastery of Christ became basic to extra-ecclesiastical Christian movements such as Rosicrucianism, alchemy, ultra-Masonic orders, and Martinism. The perfected humanity, or Christ as Magus, was sovereign over all spiritual forces in the Western tradition. Western Mysteries, Module number 5, Angel Magic and Medieval European Goetic Tradition, Part 2. And by the way, that was reloaded to fix audio problems. You have to wait for the audio on the John D slide. It's there, but it starts after the bullets finish. Western Mysteries, Module 6. We're going to look at the history of Freemasonry, Masonry, Parts 1 and 2. Symbolic Freemasonry developed when the operative Masonic guilds accepted Rosicrucian and other aristocratic mystics interested in alchemical, astrological, and other esoteric work, while the rule of Cromwell and British Puritans made it illegal for them to meet. And so that's how these guilds connected to create symbolic Freemasonry, which is what Freemasonry is today. The Templars had a very close relationship with the operative Masonic guilds, the ones who actually built things, and had done so for centuries beforehand. It probably originated centuries earlier in Scotland, where the Templars were forced to flee after Black Friday. So we're then going to look at the Hermetic Renaissance, Part 1. The purchase of the Hermetic corpus from Islamic scholars and Ficino's translation of them inaugurated a proliferation of alchemical, astrological, and other medieval sciences in the European Renaissance that soon influenced everything from art to theology. If we look at Module 8, we continue the Hermetic Renaissance, Part 2, special reference to Botticelli and his art and what the symbolic things that are represented in it, Paracelsus and Nostradamus, Theophrastus, Bombastus, etc. Please sponsor my videos, by the way, by becoming a patron on my Patreon channel. So there's special reference to Botticelli and Paracelsus and Nostradamus. So in Episcopal Studies, the playlist called Western Mystery Tradition, we're continuing with the 9th presentation. Part 1, the Ultramasonic Orders, the Egypt Researchers, the Martinists and Martinism, Angel Magic, Gnostic Churches, etc. Part 2, Gnostic Churches, Spiritism and Spiritualism, Founders of Theosophy and the Esoteric Roots of Mormonism, the Episcopate Vagantes, etc. The 10th module, the 20th to 21st centuries, produced a plethora of new, updated, revised, or restored initiatic schools. And this is an overview. It's by no means comprehensive, but merely introductory. And then there is a second part of this that's continued. And one of the things we'll discuss is THG, which is required of bishops. Those who are priests who are preparing for the episcopate must undergo initiation and work through the empowerments of the THG First Order. That's optional to go on to the Second Order. There is a slide of Daskalos teaching Pythagorean Christianity, which replaces a bad slide on the one previous that starts about 3550. We have then presentations on Rosalind Freemasonry. This is module 1 of a 4-part series on the antiquity and esoteric aspects of Freemasonry and how the artifacts at Rosalind Chapel in Scotland illuminate the origins of speculative Freemasonry in Templarism and its connection with the Hindu spirituality, the so-called Gypsies or Romani people who migrated into Europe from India. I used my own video from a visit there for one of the presentations. So we have Rosalind Freemasonry A and B, C, and D. And then we have a corrected slide for Rosalind Freemasonry D. Now we have a playlist called the Episcopal THG and Related playlist. So you need to go to hometemple.org THG for the THG initiatic procedure. It's done once a year, and preparation usually begins in February. So the first presentation in that playlist is on harmonic intoning, A. This is a technique you need to try to master before the spring THG initiation. And for some people it's not too difficult, for some it's pretty hard. And then we have the second presentation on harmonic intoning. We have a technique for self-healing that uses harmonic intoning and some visualizing. We have a way to optimize your immune system against the coronavirus. And then we have a slide on the Episcopate Vagantes Part 1, the history of the independent apostolic succession. Now, in early Christianity, the bishops, who were called episcopi or shepherds or overseers, were consecrated for leadership by laying on of hands by a successor of the apostles. This is the oldest continuous lineage of priesthood in world religions and is called the apostolic succession. Now, this is an overview of valid apostolic succession passed into the leadership of contemporary New Age and Gnostic churches. You go to part 2 to learn about the apostolic lineages of the Home Temple and the bishops I've trained and consecrated in the Home Temple Synod of Bishops, and my collegial Episcopal friends and associates, whom I designate as apostles of a new spirituality. And this is a book that you can get at the website, the Wisdom Seminars website. It's a free book that you can get an e-copy of. It was written some time ago, so it's not totally up to date. There are other books that are more up to date. So the next presentation is on the Episcopi Vagantes in our lineages and in the Home Temple Synod. I have the YouTube presentation of my excommunication of Pope Benedict. When I did it, why I did it, and after I did it, he resigned, which was very unusual for a pope. The introductory book for THC preparation is called the Pneumaticon, and there's a presentation that introduces you to that book, the Pneumaticon, which I wrote a few years ago. And finally, there's an introduction to my spiritual autobiography, which I call The Sparks of Gnosis, Visions, Experiences, and Relationships that Guided My Path in Life. It's available on Kindle as either an ebook or a paperback.